First Things, episode number 31.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Trying to be perfect, we try to have everything in place at one point in time, and we can't.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to First Things, the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn, and it's my goal to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. Last week, we started a brand new series on the topic of assertiveness, and I heard from quite a few of you actually at the very beginning of this. In fact, I talked to someone through Facebook, talked to several people at Facebook actually. Lisa said, I'm actually listening to this at the time it was released, not months later. How am I going to wait a whole week for the next installment? And Lisa, thank you on the one hand, and I'm sorry for the other that I can't record all of these at one time and just release them. I definitely think it's something that is going to help quite a few people, and I'm excited that it is resonating with people. Sarah mentioned that I'm really looking forward to this. She mentioned this on Facebook. So thank you for all of your encouragement at the very beginning of this series, and hopefully we can continue to really provide some amazing insight into this topic. Last week we just talked about the introduction to assertiveness and some of my misconceptions about assertiveness, and today we want to really dig apart what is assertiveness, because that's where a lot of my misconceptions came from, was in my definition of assertiveness. And yes, we're going to get into what are the roadblocks to us being assertive and how do we actually apply this to our lives, but we need to come to a common definition, and that is what today's show is about. Remember that our resource for this particular series of podcasts is the Assertiveness Workbook, and I have a link to that in my show notes at firstthingsproductivity.com/31. You can pick this up any bookstore, you can order it online, you don't have to use my link, but if you do, please know that it is more of an affiliate link. I basically get like 4 cents, I think, for any book that I sell off of that. So I'm not making money off of this and buying some condominium down in Hawaii or something like that. But it does go back into helping pay the show and pay the bills that I use to host all these files up and do all this kind of stuff like that, which I've always told you I'm happy to pay for this out of my pocket. I love the fact that I'm helping people, and to me, that's worth me investing my money into. I'm here not so you can pay me to do stuff. I'm here to help you, and I'm so glad that you are part of my journey. But if you do use my affiliate link, just know I get a few cents back for any book that's sold. And I think to date, ever since I've started doing that, I think I've made a grand total of 20 cents. And that's it. So just know that it does help the show in some small way, but feel free to pick it up anywhere you want. Don't feel like you have to use any of my links to buy that. But I do encourage you to pick up this workbook, especially if you think that you have some area that you want to work on in assertiveness, because there's a lot of exercises in here that I'm not going to be posting up for copyright reasons. And I'm not going to be talking through every single example. In the book, he gives a lot of story examples and illustrations of people who exhibit particular behaviors and getting past them. And again, there's too much to read on the show, so there's so much more material you can get from this book, and I would just encourage you to pick it up. Support this author, basically telling him thank you for writing this book that we are studying in this particular podcast. So what is assertiveness? Because there's a lot of misconceptions around this, a lot of odd thinking about this. And the fact is, all of us are social creatures. We socialize and we communicate with other people. And I don't care if you consider yourself an extrovert or an introvert, you are still a social creature and you have to talk to people. I don't know very many people who cannot not talk to people. You have to talk to everyone, even if you're just ordering food or you're having to order internet service or do anything in this life. You pretty much have to talk to people. You have to socialize in some ways. And some of us like socializing more than others, but we all have to do this. We all have to get stuff, and we all have to talk to people that we work with, or tell people what to do, or ask people to do certain things. We have to ask people and request them to do things. We have to say when they haven't done good things. This is all part of the interaction that we face in life. Now, one of the key aspects in this book that I find very encouraging is that assertiveness is a form of communication. It's a style of communication. It's not your personality. It's not the type of person you are. It is a style. It is a mechanism by which you communicate. And therefore, we have a variety of styles. Assertiveness is not the same thing as aggression. Aggressive behavior, aggressive communication is a style. It is a form of communicating. Passivity is a form of communication. A passive and aggressive style is a form of communication. So there are many different styles of communication, and assertiveness is just a form of communication. And quite frankly, we all have these forms of communication. We all do them. It's just that some of them are more stronger than others, and some of them we prefer more than others. And sadly, many of the, what I would consider the poorer or the worst type of styles, the passive, the aggressive, the passive-aggressive styles, those are the ones that we usually operate in, or we gravitate toward, or sometimes we mistake them for assertiveness, especially the aggressive style, as I always did. But it's helpful to know that these are just styles, these are just ways that we communicate. They are not types of people. So when I talk about aggressive behavior, aggressive styles of communication, I'm not talking about aggressive people. So don't accept the label, well, I'm just a passive person. No, you have a passive style that you gravitate more toward than any other style, but it is your style of communication. It's not who you are as a person. You can use any of the styles of communication. It is your choice, and you always have a choice. You are not the style of communication. You are not a passive person. You are not a passive-aggressive person. You are not an assertive person. No, these are mechanisms. These are tools that we can use to communicate with each other, and you have a choice of which tool you will use. And most of these tools may be more applicable under certain circumstances than others, although I do feel like the assertiveness tool is the most beneficial one for us to operate in. And I think it's very important that we establish this right off the bat, that we're not talking about the type of personality you have or the type of person that you are. And if you have accepted some of these as your label, as your identity, well, you know, I've been talking from the very beginning of the show against that. Quit labeling yourself. Quit accepting a label as who you are in this world. You may be passive, but you aren't a passive person. Just realize that this is a style of communication for whatever reason you have tended to adopt and operate in much more than any other. But you do see all of these styles in every person. I've seen aggressive styles in people that I would consider quite passive. Now, the way it was exhibited might not have been as much of a firework display as someone who normally uses an aggressive style to communicate in, but I can see these styles in everybody. And yes, I do see the assertiveness style in people, but it is very underdeveloped in many people because they tended to gravitate toward these other styles of communication as the only possibilities and don't realize that there really is a fourth style of communication, which is this assertiveness style. So before we define what assertiveness is, let's talk about what assertiveness is not. And to do this, we want to go through each of the other types of communication styles. And let's first start with the passive, because most people would not confuse passivity with assertiveness. But let's start there as one style, because most likely the majority of people who may be listening to me about assertiveness, if it's really resonating with you, might be more on the passive style of communication. Although I do think some of you who are listening to me may be in these other styles and wanting to find this balance in assertiveness. The basic essential element of the passive style of communication is that you want to avoid conflict at all costs. Do anything you can to avoid a negative word, a criticism, a conflict, a argument, anything you can do, you will do to avoid this. So how might you do this? Well, you may actually give in to people, even if they're unreasonable demands. They place unreasonable demands on you, and you give into it to avoid a conflict. So you have a vacation next week, and your boss says, I really need you to call in to this meeting on Wednesday. Yes, I know you're taking your once-in-a-lifetime vacation to Hawaii, but I need you to call in. And you say, call in on my vacation? Sure, okay, no problem. But it's an unreasonable demand, and you give into it. You don't actually talk back, or you don't actually counter it. You don't actually engage in conversation to see if there's a workable solution to this. You give into this, or you just go along with the crowd. How many times have you gone out to eat with someone and someone would suggest some place to eat and they say, is that okay with you? and it's actually your least favorite restaurant, but yet you say, sure, it's fine, let's just go there, just because you don't want to sound argumentative or any kind of conflict or disagreement in any way. Maybe you don't offer your opinion until everyone else has offered theirs, and even then you may not still offer your opinion, but you let everyone have their say, and then you may give yours, but only at the very end. You will never criticize or give negative feedback. Even if it's something that's really bad, you will not tell anyone it was bad. You will just slide it under the rug. You may just not say anything at all. Could be that if you don't want to lie and say that it was good because you knew it was bad, then you just don't say anything at all. You just basically leave it where it is. The basic element is that you never do anything. You never say anything that's going to elicit disapproval or bad comments or criticism in any way. Now, there are times maybe we could come up where being passive is a good thing as far as a communication style, but the majority of times, embracing a passive style of communication, you are giving control of your life to other people, even when you don't want to do so. By being passive or communicating in a passive way, you're basically saying you're in control of my life, and what you say goes for me, and I have no choice. We can become very submissive in our body language. We will avoid eye contact with people. We will appear nervous. We'll look downward, and we will often make ourselves appear very small. We're very submissive to other people. And like the author mentions in the book, it's very interesting that we call this style of communication passive because that's suggesting that we're sitting around and we don't do anything. But actually what happens to most of us is it makes us way more active than we would want because we are going twice as hard, twice as fast to please other people. So for example, on the instance in which the boss is asking you to call in on your vacation, well, that's complicating your life and it's making you do extra work and it's actually making you work even harder because now you're trying to balance your vacation and your job at the same time, and it's overbearing, and you basically try to make both of those happen. So even though we are saying it's a passive communication style, it actually makes you twice as busy or even more than twice as busy trying to gain the approval of other people, trying to explain your actions to other people, trying to solve someone else's problems. The author says this in his book. He says, "We always have the choice of whether or not to be passive, but often we are not aware of making the choice. Instead, when we behave passively, we often feel helpless, as though we are not in charge of our own lives. This is because passive behavior often results from a belief that we are not allowed to behave any other way. Here are some examples of belief that may hold you back. Other people are more important than me. Other people are entitled to have control over their lives. I am not. They can do things effectively. I can't. My role in life is to be the servant." And I'll tell you, for that last one, I've caught myself in this mode many times in my life because one emotion that can come from this type of passive style is a resentment with all the demands that are being placed on you. You can find yourself becoming very angry with other people, even friends, and basically consider them to be manipulators, or as I've been known to get into habits of, as leeches. There's so many times in my life that I've looked back and I would be in a mode of saying, all the people that are in my life are nothing but leeches. All they do is just suck the life out of me. They don't give back to my life. They don't add back to my life. They're just leeches in life. And I've realized that why I was feeling that way was because I was living in a passive style of communication. I was just taking on everybody else's demands and trying to solve all of their problems for them and take on unreasonable demands to my time for things and not saying anything to that. And all I get is this resentment out of that. Other people have a tremendous fear of being rejected, and that's why they're so passive, because they're afraid to say something of how they feel or how they see things, because people may reject them, and they need people's approval of themselves. They can't afford to have rejection from certain people in their lives. They're so dependent upon them as their source of identity that to be rejected is a total destruction of their world. And therefore, they passively go along with things that people require of them. I think a common feeling among all people is a sense of helplessness, frustration at life because you don't have control over your life. It feels like life is happening to you, not that you have any choices. So you have to do this. What can I do but take this call on my vacation? I have no choice in this. And there's this sense that I'm helpless, that I have no choice whatsoever. I encountered this idea of helplessness. I've mentioned Martin Seligman many times, a psychologist, and I first encountered him teaching statistics to students because I would find that students would come into my class and some of them would come straight up to me the very first day and tell me, they would say, Dr. Vaughn, I can't get this. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to be a very frustrating student for you because I cannot get math. I cannot get statistics. And I thought, how strange is it that they come into my class and the very first announcement they make is of helplessness, to admit this and basically say, this is my identity. I am helpless in this area. I can never figure it out. I am beyond hope in this one area. And helplessness is something that we learn in life. It's because of how we approach failure. When we internalize failure as our identity, we start attributing things like helplessness to these areas of our lives. Now, helplessness develops from a multitude of reasons. Some people actually grow up in families that are extremely considerate, so they would never ask you to do anything for fear of hurting your feelings or from having to tell you no with something. And I've seen households like this. They're afraid of the word no. Don't want to tell their kids no, you can't have this, or no, you need to wait. Oh, we'll just go get it for you right now. And you grow up in these types of households, it can influence this passive style as a dominant style for you. And on the other hand, there are some families that demand perfect obedience from their children, so that you have to be obedient 100% of the time. And it's almost a very military type of family who has just got to be perfect. And therefore, this fear of perfection, this fear of failure can sometimes push a very passive style onto people as their dominant style of communication. There's some families that unfortunately go to the extreme of that, where you have violent situations and how dare you say no to me, and I'm going to show you never to say no to me. And that can very much influence a very passivity approach to life. And then some people are raised in great houses, but they just never really see assertiveness in action. And all they may see is aggression or something else, and they never quite see what assertiveness is all about. And I typically fall on more of the passivity side of things. This is where I've kind of grown up, and my personality type tends to gravitate toward this particular style of communication. Yes, I've been aggressive before, I've seen passive-aggressive before, but passivity is generally my style of communication where I've kind of fallen into. And I will tell you that sometimes it can be useful, but most of the time, and hear me, I say most of the time, not some of the time or a lot, most of the time, what I've learned is that a passive style of communication is only going to lead to misery. It's going to leave you frustrated in life. It's going to make you feel walked on in life. You're going to have a lot of resentment. You're going to be bound up by fears of failure and rejection. And that is not a good way to live, my friends. It is something that I've seen in all the years of my life that I don't want to live this way. That yes, there may be occasional times where it's helpful or good, but generally, no. Without doubt, I don't think anyone here would think that passivity and assertiveness are the same thing. But let's go into the next style of communication, because this is often misinterpreted as assertiveness, and that is the aggressive style of communication. Many people think that to be assertive means you have to be aggressive, that is your style of communication. People who deal with this aggressive style of communication basically see their life as an effect, not as a cause, and therefore it's a reactionary thing. Aggression is an outlash at life, a fear of life, trying to regain control and to dominate one's will in such a way that you do as I say, because I have to be in control. I have to maintain this part of my identity, and you are a threat to that. Therefore, I'm going to do what I can to gain control of this situation, and my biggest fear is losing control of this situation. So let me read this quote from the book. He says, "The aggressive style is the flip side of the passive style. Instead of submitting to others, we try to get others to submit to us. It is important for us to win regardless of the cost to other people. Our aim is to control the behavior of others through intimidation. Their opinions, boundaries, goals, and requests are stupid or meaningless barriers to be overcome. We are dominant wolves bending others to our will. The funny thing is that aggressive people usually don't feel all that dominant. Instead, they often feel helpless, abused, and the subject of unreasonable and excessive demands. Aggression is almost always the result of feeling threatened. Responding with anger seems perfectly justified." Now, that's a great quote, and I want to zero back in on one particular part of that. He says that the aggressive style is when we try to get others to submit to us. Now, I will tell you that for the longest part of my life, I thought that was the definition of assertiveness. I thought assertiveness meant that you get others to submit to your request, that you get other people to say yes to you, that they submit to you and what you think and what you say, and that is not assertiveness. That is aggression. Aggressive style is when you must get other people to submit to you, and you will do whatever it takes, intimidating them, manipulating a situation, whatever you can do to make them do what you want, and that is not assertiveness. So the aggression style of communication is deliberately intimidating other people to get what you want, with the flip side that they will probably end up resenting you and have very little incentive to do what you're asking them to do, feel very little affection and loyalty towards you. You're basically burning your bridges in the attempt to get them to do what you want them to do. A very aggressive person may also cause a passive person to become passive aggressive and start exhibiting those behaviors, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. The feeling of power that an aggressive style gets is very short-lived. Some people actually feel worse by doing this type of thing and manipulating other people, but the feeling of power really only lasts a very short time. It's usually followed by more frustration and helplessness, because this is really the core of an aggressive style, is this frustration and helplessness. And when you exert control over someone or try to exert control, it doesn't make those feelings go away. It actually can amplify them even more. And I've heard some people say, well, it's just good to blow off some steam every now and then. I just need to do that. But, and he mentions this in the book, and I've seen this as well. Research actually shows that blowing off steam actually makes you more angry, not less, in the long run. It actually introduces the very thing you think you're getting rid of by blowing off steam. It just reintroduces and reinforces that in your life. It doesn't actually help as much as you think it helps. And aggressive people generally act that way because they've had a model in their life that has taught them that, usually in a very aggressive parent. And that has taught some people to use that style as their dominant form of communication. Aggressive people generally have very low self-esteem, and they feel very threatened even by minor situations. And they will blow up at that because they need these situations as a crutch. It is their identity source, and if you threaten that identity source, you can get a backlash of anger and manipulation and guilt coming from this aggressive style. And many people use aggressive style because they really don't see the negative consequences. All they see is the benefit they reap from that. They don't realize the destruction that they provide in other people's lives by using this particular style to communicate with them. So assertiveness is not aggression. When we say we're wanting to be assertive in life, we're not talking about manipulating people. We're not talking about controlling them. We're not talking about doing whatever we can to make them do what we want. That is not assertiveness. That is manipulation. That is aggressive styles of communication. And that is not what we're about in these particular episodes. Now, there is a middle ground that's very interesting, and that is the passive-aggressive style. And that's when you're both passive and aggressive. And let me read this from the book. He says, the anger of the aggressive style and the fear of the passive style both have an influence. The anger makes you want to get the other person, but the fear holds you back from doing it directly. When we are passive-aggressive, we disguise our aggression so that we can avoid taking responsibility for it. He says, consider an example. Your employer has asked for a report by noon Friday, despite the fact that you are already overloaded with work. Rather than yelling at her, which is aggressive, staying up all night to finish it, which is passive, or explaining the situation, which would be the assertive, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, you simply forget to do the report. You get your way, you frustrate the boss, and you remain able to deny responsibility for your actions. After all, anyone can forget things now and then. That is the passive-aggressive style. You're getting your way, you are using and manipulating a situation to get your way, but you're doing it in a very passive way. Oh, you're just forgetting something. Or you undermine workers by bad-mouthing them to the boss. Or you can't find the time to do the favor that you promised to do. Or you routinely show up late with an excuse in hand. Or you just delay doing something to the point that someone else has to take over for it. You conveniently forget things. Oh yeah, I forgot that I was supposed to do that. And it's all a very deliberate, passive way of aggressively dominating a situation. Because in all these situations, you are getting your way, but you have a very plausible excuse that allows you to not take responsibility for your actions. If someone confronts you with why you didn't do this, you have an excuse. Oh, I wanted to be on time, but the bus was late. Or there's some excuse for this, and you can excuse away not doing something. And the key question to know is your intention. What did you intend in this particular situation? Did you really intend to be late, or was it really an accident? And you have to ask yourself, if you're always late, what is that really saying? because that sounds more like an intention behind it, because you can fix that. If you are late one day and you realize that the bus shows up late, well, then you could maybe take another form of transportation another day. But if you find yourself always exhibiting these behaviors, there may be intention behind it, and you may be passively, aggressively trying to manipulate situations. Here's another good indicator. Do you have a hint, even a small hint of satisfaction if things went wrong? So if you didn't do a job because you forgot, are you a little bit satisfied at that? If you were a little bit late, are you a little bit satisfied because you feel a little helpless in a situation, and this gives you a sense of control back in your life? That sometimes can basically point to a passive-aggressive style of communication. And by the way, he talks about later in the book that there are some people that alternate between passive and aggressive, and that doesn't make you a passive-aggressive person. You may approach one particular situation where you're kind of passive, and then another situation you find yourself a little bit more aggressive in that, and that doesn't make you a passive-aggressive style. A passive-aggressive style is when you are passively being aggressive, when you are directly trying to manipulate people or situations, but you're doing it in a very quiet, passive manner. That is what passive-aggressive is. It isn't that you have some areas that you're passive in, some areas that you're aggressive in, or even that you flip-flop between them, but you're using both at the same time. That's the key. Are you using both of these styles at the same time? So again, if you are late and you inconvenience the other person, that's aggressive, while avoiding the responsibility for being late, your actions, that's passive. That's using both styles at the same time. So don't think that you see both styles in your life. If you're not using them at the same moment in time in a particular situation, that's not passive-aggressive. You're just showing signs that you use all styles. And I firmly believe that we all use these styles. We all exhibit passive and passive-aggressive behavior. It's just that each of us uniquely show different weights in those areas. Some of us use one style a lot more than others, and some of us think that we are so much one style that the others don't exist. But if we had the time, say a very aggressive person and somebody very, very aggressive style, and that seems like to them that's all they do, that's all they are is an aggressive person. But I bet if we interviewed them, we would find some areas, may not be a lot, but there are some areas that they're passive in as well. But they have such a loud personality, you would never know it, and you probably wouldn't even think it, and that person probably wouldn't think they had it, but they do somewhere. I think all these styles are in all of us, just in different weights. Okay, so finally, what is assertiveness then? Because this is what we're talking about in the series of podcasts, and I'm telling you, it's not passivity, it's not aggressiveness, it's not manipulating, it's not making people do what we want, it's not a passive-aggressive combination, it's none of that. So what is assertiveness then? Well, let me read this straight from the book because I love his definition in this. He says, assertiveness is not a strategy for getting your own way. Let me say that again because that is so important. Assertiveness is not a strategy for getting your own way. Instead, it recognizes that you are in charge of your own behavior and that you decide what you will and will not do. Gosh, that sounds like something we talked about in the Now Habit. I'd go back to those topics of procrastination. We talked about choice. It recognizes that you are in charge of your own behavior and that you decide what you will and will not do. Similarly, the assertive style involves recognizing that other people are in charge of their own behavior and does not attempt to take that control from them. When we behave assertively, we are able to acknowledge our own thoughts and wishes honestly without the expectation that others will automatically give in to us. We express respect for their feelings and opinions without necessarily adopting their opinions or doing what they expect or demand. This does not mean that we become inconsiderate of the wishes of others. We listen to their wishes and expectations. Then we decide whether or not to go along with them. We might choose to do so even if we would prefer to do something else, but it is our choice. Whenever we go along with others, it is our decision to do so anyway. But we can often feel helpless because we forget that we are under our own control. If we are being assertive, we may also express our preferences for the behavior of others. We might assertively request that someone speak to us in a kinder way, or do a favor for us, or complete a task that they have undertaken. But we will acknowledge that whether they do any of these things is up to them, as indeed it is. Now, that's a great definition for assertiveness. It's a great starting point. And it all comes down to what we really talked about in the now habit about dealing with procrastination, and that is we've got to get back to the place where we see that we do have a choice. We have a choice on how we can think, how we can choose to react in a situation. We can't control other people. And passivity is basically saying, I will do whatever you tell me to do and become a robot in this situation. And that's not assertiveness. Assertiveness says, I respect myself enough that I'm going to choose what I feel good about in life. And I'm not going to do things I don't feel good about in life. It's going to be my choice. I'm not trying to make you do something and change your mind. No, I respect what you think. And I'm going to honestly listen to what you say and weigh it carefully as an option for me. And if I go along with what you say, even if I don't fully agree with it, then I'm going to be choosing to do so. I'm not going to be a victim to it. I'm going to deliberately choose to follow along with you for some reason, even though it may not be exactly what I would do in that situation, or I may choose not to do it at all. But in so doing, I'm going to fully respect your choice and your thoughts, and I'm not going to try to change you or manipulate you or to control you in any way. And this is what assertiveness is all about. It's all about a respect for other people and a choice that I give myself, a dignity that I give myself in this life. It really is the only strategy among the other three that allows us and others to fully be in a relationship with each other. I can't be in a relationship if I'm passive because I'm not respecting myself in that situation. I can't be in a relationship if I'm being aggressive or passive aggressive because I'm trying to control you and I don't respect you. In assertiveness, I'm respecting myself and I'm respecting you, and I'm allowing you to have your own thoughts, you to have your own actions, you have your own consequences for your choices, as I'm allowing myself to have the same thing. Now, how does all that work out? Especially in a world in which we interact with people who are passive and aggressive, it becomes very challenging. To be assertive in a situation with a person who is aggressive and trying to manipulate and control me, or to be assertive in a situation with a person who's trying to be passive and bow down to me and not actually interact with me as an equal. Well, we're going to get into that over the next weeks. Now, there is some homework that's in the book. In the book, there's some checkpoints. There's 2 of them in this particular chapter of where are you in life? How are you dealing with certain situations? Are you more passive in this type of situation, more aggressive, more assertive, more passive aggressive? And there's this whole chart in there that you will want to look at and get the book to read through and see kind of where you're at in your life. And there's another homework that's later in the book that's more of a self-assessment where you're going through and asking yourself some very big questions. Like, can you list 3 situations in your life in which you would like to be more assertive? Not aggressive, not passive aggressive, but assertive. And where would you see yourself in life? When do you get most passive? I get most passive when what? I get most aggressive when what? My biggest fear of being assertive is what? There's basically this element of workbook that I think it would be highly valuable for you to go through and think through these various issues and see where would you want to be assertive. And quite frankly, I think it's most, if not all of our lives, we should be assertive. We should have this utmost respect for other people to not manipulate or control them or make them do anything, but at the same time, to love and respect ourselves enough that we actually say what we feel, or at least, if we don't say it out loud, at least we maintain the choice for what we do and what we think, and we don't feel like a victim in this life. Well, that wraps up this episode on the definitions of assertiveness. I hope it helps. If you do have some questions, I've really tried to break apart what assertiveness really is and how it's different from aggressive behaviors, aggressive styles of communication. But if you still have questions on that, then let me know. You can write me and put a post on my blog at firstthingsproductivity.com/31. You can leave a question there. You can leave a voicemail question for me if you like. You can connect to me on Twitter or on Facebook. You can ask me questions there. Feel free to ask me questions. Like I've always said to you, I'm not the expert on everything. If I was, I wouldn't be suggesting you read this book. I would just say, listen to me and nothing else. But I consider this guy to be an expert on the topic of assertiveness. And we're going to be using this as a resource for us. But still, I think it would be great for some of you, if you have questions, that you have somebody that you can ask. Who can I ask about this? I'm kind of confused. I heard these definitions, but I'm not really sure about this situation or that. Or I would love to have somebody that I could bounce this off of in my life and see what they think. Well, that's why I'm here. So feel free. Feel free to leave me a comment in my blog comments. You can leave me a voicemail, you can tweet me, you can leave me a Facebook. And I told you that I don't really have a very convenient way for you to privately message me, but I'm trying to work on that. And for right now, you can always get on Facebook and send me a private message that way if you really want or need to talk about some of these issues. But feel free, ask questions. Treat this like it's a college course. You are taking a multi-month long course on the topic of assertiveness. You've just signed up for it. I'm assigning you homework, and I'm your guide, and here's our textbook. And as part of being in a class, ask me questions. Let me know if you have concerns or you're just not getting certain things. And sometimes I may not really explain things the best way that I can. So I would love your feedback, because then I can go back and try to re-explain it another way to help people really grasp what we're talking about here, or to answer just concerns that you may have about this. Now, having said that, there are some things we'll get into that will be answered 2 or 3 weeks down the road. So there's some questions you may have right now that we will be talking about soon. But anytime we talk about things like what is assertiveness and how does it deal with aggression, and it's still something bothers you about that, or you're confused about an area, then just feel free to let me know. I'm more than happy to help and more than happy to provide some guidance. And if it's something that I think would benefit a lot of people, then I'll mention it on the next podcast, and I'll say, I got this question about this, and let me talk about it for a few minutes, and you know, other people can benefit from your question. And that's the great thing about doing stuff like this, is that I can turn that around and help other people who may have had the same question, they just didn't ask it. As always, please consider leaving me a rating, a comment on iTunes, on Stitcher, BlackBerry, Zune, wherever you may be listening to me. It just helps other people know about the show. Would greatly appreciate any comments. I don't think I've had any comments or ratings, especially on iTunes, in a while, and would love if some of my new listeners might consider going on there and just leaving me a brief comment or rating. I would love to hear from you that way, and would love for you to leave that feedback for other people who would be looking at the show and considering whether or not it's something worth their time and worth listening to. Again, if you have any comments on this episode, firstthingsproductivity.com/31 is a place that you can go to and find various things from past podcasts to other blog articles I've done, as well as leaving me comments for the show. So until next time, remember this. Assertiveness is all about respect and choice. Respecting other people for who they are, what they think, and the choices that they have in life, while respecting yourself that you have exactly the same thing. That your thoughts and your wishes and your choices are valuable and worth something in this life. That you are worth something in this life. Do not discount your worth, your importance in this life, your thoughts, your wishes, your choices, and remember, you always have a choice. It's all about what consequences you're willing to live with, and we've talked about this in the procrastination episode. You can say no to your boss, you do have a choice, but there may be consequences to saying no to your boss, but you always have a choice, and never rob yourself of a choice in this life. This is what assertiveness is all about. So embrace today with passion and intention, and don't die with your music still inside you.